Hey everyone, tonight we're doing something a little different. We're going to trace the history of cannabis from the Stone Age to your neighbor's backyard dispensary. And before you ask, yes, this is a history channel. Yes, we're really doing this. And yes, ancient people were absolutely getting high, though they'd probably describe it as communing with the divine, because everything sounds better when you add mysticism and incense. So before you get comfortable, maybe hit that like button and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy having a stranger whisper about historical drug use while you try to sleep. No pressure. Also, drop a comment with where you're tuning in from and what time it is. I love knowing there's someone in Perth listening to this at 3 a.m. alongside someone in Toronto having breakfast. It's like a global slumber party, except we're all in different time zones and nobody brought snacks. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Adjust your pillow. Get that blanket just right. And let's ease into a journey that spans 10,000 years, 5 continents, and more accidental discoveries than the entire history of penicillin. You ready? Neither am I, but that's fine. History never waits for permission. Part 1. The accidental discovery, 8,000 BCE to 3,000 BCE. We're starting in roughly 8,000 BCE, the Stone Age. Emphasis on stone, because tools are still basically hit thing with rock until something useful happens. Civilization is in alpha testing. Humans have figured out fire, farming, and that standing too close to mammoths is generally a bad idea. Life expectancy is somewhere around, hopefully next Tuesday. And the biggest medical achievement is not dying from infected splinters. Somewhere in what's now Central Asia, probably the windswept grasslands between Siberia and Mongolia, a forager is having the worst day. Let's call him Grok. Grok is cold. His feet hurt. He's pretty sure a wolf has been following him for 3 days, and he's just realized that the berries he ate this morning were definitely not the good kind. Grok stumbles into his camp, where his extended family, about 12 people who share DNA and grievances, are huddled around a fire. The fire is everything. It's heating, lighting, cooking, and entertainment all in one. Basically, it's prehistoric Netflix, except the only show is stare at flames until sleep. Now, Grok needs to contribute something. He can't show up empty-handed. So he grabs some of the tall, fibrous plants growing nearby. They're everywhere, these plants. Tough stalks, weird leaves, kind of smelly. Nobody's quite sure what to do with them yet, but they burn, and that's good enough. He tosses them onto the fire. Within moments, something changes. The smoke isn't normal. It's thick, pungent, almost sweet. It curls upward in lazy spirals that seem to hang in the air longer than regular smoke. And everyone sitting around the fire suddenly feels different. Not bad different, just different. Grok's headache from those terrible berries fades. His wife stops complaining about her sore back. His teenage son, who's been sulking in the corner because nobody appreciated his new spear design, suddenly finds everything hilarious. Even the wolf outside seems less threatening. Maybe it's not even a wolf. Maybe it's just a really ambitious dog. They sit there for hours, watching the flames dance, occasionally giggling at nothing. One of them starts humming, a low, rhythmic sound that somehow makes perfect sense. Another stares at their hands like they've never seen fingers before. These are amazing, they might have said, if language had evolved enough for abstract appreciation. I have 5. Why 5? Who decided 5? Nobody knows they've just made history. They're just cold, tired people who accidentally hotboxed a Stone Age campfire. But from this moment, or thousands of moments like it across Asia, humans and cannabis begin a relationship that will outlast empires, religions, and every attempt to make it illegal. Here's your quirky fact of the evening. Archaeologists have found cannabis seeds in burial sites dating back to 8,000 BCE. Not woven into rope, not pressed for oil, just seeds, carefully placed with the dead. Either it was considered valuable enough for the afterlife, or someone really didn't want their stash confiscated by the village elders. possibly both. You blink, and suddenly you're not at Grok's fire anymore. Time has moved forward about 2,000 years. We're now in roughly 6,000 BCE, and humans have gotten significantly better at this whole civilization thing. They've figured out agriculture, which means they can stay in one place instead of wandering around hoping to stumble onto dinner. And they've figured out that this cannabis plant, it's useful. Really useful. You're standing in what will one day be called Taiwan, watching a small farming community go about their morning. The air smells like millet cooking, wet earth, and smoke from cooking fires. Children chase chickens that clearly don't want to be caught. Women work long fibers between their hands, twisting them into something stronger. Those fibers are hemp. Cannabis sativa, specifically, the non-psychoactive version that makes excellent rope and terrible attempts at getting high. An elderly woman sits in the shade, her fingers moving with the automatic precision of someone who's done this 10,000 times. She's making rope. The hemp fibers are incredibly strong, stronger than anything else they've found. You can tie down a boat with this, secure a shelter, make fishing nets that won't snap when you actually catch something. She doesn't know why the plant is so strong. She doesn't need to. It works, and in 6,000 BCE, it works, is the entire scientific method. You watch as another woman weaves hemp into rough cloth. It's scratchy, uncomfortable, and will probably give you a rash, but it's also durable enough to last years. Fashion hasn't been invented yet. Function is all that matters. And here's where cannabis starts its long career as humanity's most versatile plant. While everyone's focused on wheat and barley, the boring staples that keep you alive, hemp is quietly becoming the duct tape of the ancient world. Need rope? Hemp. Need cloth? Hemp. Need paper? Eventually, hemp. Need to fix that broken cart? Probably involves hemp rope. Need to forget about your existential dread in a world without antibiotics? Well, that's a different part of the plant, and we'll get there. The thing is, early humans didn't distinguish between hemp and marijuana the way we do now. It was all cannabis. Some varieties made better rope. Some made better experiences. But they were working this out through trial and error, which must have led to some interesting village council meetings. Okay, so the plants from the valley make excellent fishing nets. Agreed. The plants from the hillside make fishing nets that are fine, but also make you forget you were supposed to be fishing. Also noted. Here's the scholarly debate that still rumbles through academic papers. When exactly did humans figure out that certain cannabis plants had psychoactive properties? Was it deliberate breeding or happy accident? Did they notice that plants from different regions had different effects and start cultivating accordingly? We don't know. The Neolithic farmers didn't leave Yelp reviews. But we know that by 4000 BCE, cannabis was being cultivated across China, Central Asia, and parts of Eastern Europe. And wherever humans grew it, they found new uses for it. You walk through another village, this one in ancient China. A healer is grinding cannabis seeds into paste. The seeds are rich in oils and proteins, genuinely nutritious, even if they won't get you high. She mixes the paste with other herbs, spreading it on a wound. Does it work? Probably about as well as any Neolithic medicine, which is to say, sometimes yes, mostly no, but at least you tried something. The important thing is that cannabis is entering the medical vocabulary, becoming one of the plants you reach for when the spirits of illness need convincing to leave. In the corner, a young man is experimenting. He's noticed that when you burn the flowering tops of certain plants, the smoke makes you feel contemplative, relaxed, like maybe the universe isn't as chaotic as it seems. He doesn't have words for THC or cannabinoids. He just knows that this smoke is different from regular smoke. And in a world where life is hard, short, and often painful, different, in a pleasant way, is worth investigating. So he saves some of the flowers, dries them carefully, and when the village gathers for the next seasonal ritual, because Neolithic people loved a good ritual, he brings them along. The seasons turn, generations pass. You're moving through time now, watching cannabis spread across Asia like a particularly motivated plant with excellent PR. By 4000 BCE, it's everywhere. China, India, Central Asia, the Middle East. Wherever humans settle, cannabis follows. Or maybe humans follow cannabis. The relationship is symbiotic enough that it's hard to tell who domesticated whom. In the Yangshao culture of ancient China, hemp fibers are being woven into some of the earliest known textiles. Archaeologists have found pottery with hemp cord impressions, meaning people were using it to create patterns, decorate, express themselves. We've gone from useful rope to aesthetically pleasing rope, which is a significant leap in human consciousness. You're in a village along the Yellow River now. The air is thick with humidity. Rice paddies stretch to the horizon, and in the distance, you can see hemp fields swaying in the breeze. They're tall, these plants, sometimes reaching 12 feet. A forest of cannabis, grown not for pleasure, but for production. A farmer walks through the rows, checking the stalks. He's looking for the strong, fibrous males. Yes, cannabis has male and female plants, a fact that will become important later when people start caring about the flowers. For now, he just wants stalks that will make good rope. But over in the next field, his wife has noticed something. The female plants, the ones with the flowers, smell different, stronger, almost intoxicating even before you burn them. She's been experimenting quietly, because admitting you enjoy something is socially risky when everyone's just trying to survive. She's discovered that if you collect the resin from the flowers, dry it properly, and add it to the evening fire, everyone sleeps better. The old man with the bad leg stops groaning. The children settle down. Even the village dogs seem calmer. Is it medicine? Is it recreation? Is it spirituality? In 4000 BCE, these categories don't exist yet. It's just the thing that helps, and that's sufficient. Here's your next quirky fact. Cannabis seeds have been found in Neolithic food vessels across China and Korea. People were eating them, probably roasted, definitely nutritious. They taste nutty, earthy, and if you've ever tried modern hemp seeds in your smoothie, you've tasted something your ancestors ate 6,000 years ago. Though they probably didn't blend it with kale and call it wellness. You're starting to notice a pattern. Everywhere humans go, cannabis goes. It's hitchhiking on migration routes, traveling with traders, spreading through the fundamental human tendency to share things that make life slightly less terrible. By 3000 BCE, the plant has reached the edges of Europe, down into the Middle East, and across to India. And in each place, it adapts. Different climates produce different varieties. The cannabis growing in the hot, dry regions of Central Asia develops higher concentrations of THC, the compound that makes you high, possibly as protection against intense sun and harsh conditions. The cannabis growing in cooler, wetter regions stays mild, fibrous, perfect for rope and nothing else. Humans, being observant when properly motivated, start to notice these differences. The plants from the mountains hit different. The ones from the valley are better for cloth. And slowly, probably over centuries, people begin to cultivate accordingly. You're in the Tarim Basin now, in what will eventually be Western China. The landscape is harsh, mountains in the distance, deserts stretching in every direction. A group of nomads has set up camp near a small oasis. They're traveling merchants, moving goods along what will one day be called the Silk Road, though silk hasn't been invented yet, so right now it's more like the Stuff Road. Among their cargo, bundles of dried cannabis flowers, not for rope, for smoking. One of the merchants, weathered and lean, sits by the fire as the sun sets. He pulls out a small clay pipe, one of humanity's great inventions, right up there with the wheel and bread, and packs it with dried cannabis. The flower crackles as he lights it from the fire. He inhales deeply, holds it, exhales slowly. His companions join him. They pass the pipe around, each taking their turn. And as the stars emerge in the desert sky, they talk about the journey ahead, about the family they left behind, about the gods, the weather, the meaning of dreams. Are they getting high? Absolutely. Do they think of it that way? Probably not. To them, this is ritual, relaxation, a way to connect with each other and with something larger than themselves. The smoke carries prayers upward. It softens the harsh edges of a difficult life. It makes the vast, indifferent universe feel slightly more manageable. And here's the thing about cannabis in the ancient world. It existed in a space between medicine, spirituality, and pleasure that we don't really have anymore. We want everything categorized, labeled, assigned to a specific box. But for thousands of years, cannabis was all of these things simultaneously, and nobody saw a contradiction. You lie back on the sand, looking up at the same stars those merchants saw 5,000 years ago. The fire crackles, the smoke drifts upward, and for a moment, across all that time, you understand exactly why they did this. Not to escape, but to be present, fully, completely, in a moment that would otherwise slip away unnoticed. The stars are so bright out here, so impossibly bright. You close your eyes just for a moment, and when you open them again, the desert is gone. Part 2. The sacred smoke, 3000 BCE to 1000 BCE. Time shifts, and you're somewhere new. The air smells different here. Incense, sandalwood, and something cooking in clay pots. The temperature has risen. It's humid, sticky, the kind of heat that makes you move slowly whether you want to or not. Welcome to the Indian subcontinent, around 2000 BCE. This is where cannabis stops being just useful and becomes holy. You're standing at the edge of a village in the Indus Valley. The civilization here is sophisticated. Planned cities, advanced agriculture, trade networks stretching to Mesopotamia. They've figured out plumbing, which already puts them ahead of most of medieval Europe. And they've figured out that cannabis is a gift from the gods, literally, according to them. In the sacred texts that will eventually be compiled into the Vedas, cannabis is listed as one of 5 sacred plants. The legend goes that when the gods churned the cosmic ocean, as one does when you're divine and have time on your hands, they produced amrita, the nectar of immortality. A few drops spilled on the earth, and from those drops sprouted cannabis. So from the very beginning, in this part of the world, weed isn't just medicine or rope. It's divine spillage. The universe's happy accident. You follow a procession of people toward a temple. They're dressed in simple cotton, some with flowers in their hair, many carrying offerings. It's a festival day, dedicated to Shiva, the god who discovered cannabis while wandering the Himalayas, exhausted and sunstruck. According to the stories, he rested under a tall cannabis plant, ate some of its leaves, felt revived, and became forever associated with the plant. Which means that every year, during the festival of Mahashivaratri, millions of people consume cannabis as a form of worship. This isn't rebellion. This isn't counterculture. This is established, legitimate, thousands of years old religion. Inside the temple compound, you see the preparation of bhang, the cannabis drink that will define Indian cannabis culture for millennia. A group of men work together, grinding fresh cannabis leaves with a mortar and pestle. They add milk, still warm from the morning milking. Then come the spices: cardamom, cinnamon, black pepper, sugar, sometimes almonds or pistachios. They grind everything into a thick greenish paste, then mix it with more milk until it's drinkable. The result tastes like someone made a smoothie out of lawn clippings and tried to fix it with spices and sugar. It's not winning any culinary awards. But that's not the point. A priest offers you a cup. You're hesitant, but everyone around you is drinking, so you take a small sip. It's gritty, sweet, earthy, and vaguely plant-flavored in a way that makes you think about chlorophyll more than you'd like. You swallow. Wait. Nothing happens immediately, which is how edibles work, whether we're talking about ancient bhang or modern gummies. You've got time. The festival continues around you. Musicians play drums and stringed instruments. People dance, their movements slow and deliberate. Someone is singing. a repetitive chant that seems to sync with your heartbeat. The temple is decorated with marigolds, their orange blooms almost impossibly bright in the sunlight. And then, gradually, everything softens. The edges of the world become less sharp. The music doesn't just sound beautiful, you can feel it moving through your body like a physical thing. The colors of the marigolds pulse with inner light. Someone's laughter sounds like bells, and you understand, suddenly and completely, why they call this a spiritual experience. You're not hallucinating, you're not out of control, you're just present. Deeply, almost painfully present. Every sensation is amplified. The warmth of the sun on your skin feels like a blessing. The smell of the incense is so complex, you could spend hours analyzing its layers. This is what Bhang does. This is what Shiva supposedly felt under that plant in the Himalayas. And for the devotees around you, this altered state isn't recreational, it's sacramental. They're not trying to escape reality. They're trying to perceive it more clearly, to strip away the mundane fog and see the divine nature of existence. Whether it actually works, or whether they're just really high and feeling philosophical, is a question you're too far into the Bhang to answer right now. Here's your quirky fact. Bhang is still legal in parts of India today. The government regulates it through official Bhang shops, which have names like Government Authorized Bhang Shop Number 3 and sell cannabis drinks the way Starbucks sells coffee. You can walk in, order Bhang, and consume a drink that your ancestors would recognize from 4,000 years ago, though they probably didn't have loyalty cards. The festival continues, and you drift through it in a pleasant haze. An older woman explains to you, in words you somehow understand despite the language barrier, that Bhang isn't just for festivals, it's also medicine. Ayurveda, the traditional Indian system of healing, incorporates cannabis extensively. It's used for pain, anxiety, insomnia, digestive problems, and what ancient texts delicately call an overabundance of worry. In Ayurvedic philosophy, everything is about balance. Too much of anything, heat, cold, moisture, dryness, causes illness. Cannabis, used correctly, helps restore balance. Used incorrectly, it causes you to stare at mangoes for 20 minutes, wondering about the nature of fruit. The Ayurvedic physicians take this seriously, though. They don't just hand out cannabis like candy. They consider your constitution, your specific imbalance, the phase of the moon, your age, probably your astrological chart. Then they prescribe a specific preparation at a specific dose with specific accompanying herbs. It's the opposite of take 2 gummies and hope for the best. It's careful, deliberate, medicinal in the truest sense. You watch as a physician, recognizable by his collection of dried herbs and air of concentrated knowledge, prepares a cannabis treatment for a patient. He's using the flowers, but also the leaves, the seeds, even the roots. Each part of the plant has different properties. He grinds them with other herbs whose names you don't recognize, adds clarified butter, cooks it into a paste. The patient, a middle-aged man with chronic pain, receives a small amount on his tongue. Not enough to intoxicate, just enough to ease the constant ache in his joints. He's been taking this for years, the physician explains. It doesn't cure him, but it makes life bearable. And that's the other face of cannabis in ancient India. Not the festival ecstasy, but the quiet daily relief. The grandmother who can sleep through the night. The labourer whose back doesn't scream quite so loudly. The woman whose anxiety loosens its grip just enough. But of course, not everyone approved. Even in ancient India, where cannabis was literally sacred, there were critics. Some conservative Brahmins argued that intoxication of any kind was spiritually dangerous, that altering consciousness was a shortcut, a cheat, a way of avoiding the hard work of actual enlightenment. The Manusmriti, an ancient legal text, suggests that Brahmins should avoid intoxicants, including cannabis, to maintain purity. Meanwhile, other religious texts praise cannabis as a tool for meditation and spiritual growth. The contradiction is very human, very familiar. Even when something is woven into the culture, people argue about it. You sit beneath a banyan tree, those massive trees with roots that drop from branches and create natural temples, and listen to two sadhus argue. Sadhus are Hindu holy men, ascetics who've renounced worldly life to pursue spiritual enlightenment. They often smoke cannabis from clay pipes called chillums, claiming it helps them meditate and connect with Shiva. The first sadhu, his face painted with white ash, insists that cannabis is essential for deep meditation. How can you see beyond the veil without first softening its threads? He asks, which is either profound wisdom or very effective rationalization. The second sadhu disagrees. The plant is a crutch, he argues. True meditation needs no assistance. If you cannot reach Shiva without smoke, you are not reaching Shiva at all. They've probably had this exact argument 1,000 times. They'll probably have it 1,000 more. And somewhere in the middle of their debate is the truth. Cannabis is a tool, and like any tool, it's only as useful as the person wielding it. You lean back against the tree trunk. The bark is rough against your skin. The bang has mostly worn off now, leaving you pleasantly tired, your thoughts still a bit slower than usual. Above you, monkeys chatter in the branches, completely indifferent to human philosophy, and you realize that this is what cannabis does. Whether in ancient India or modern Colorado, it creates space between you and your thoughts, between stimulus and reaction, between the person you think you are and the person you might be without all those layers of social conditioning. Whether that space is sacred or just chemical is a question people are still arguing about 4,000 years later. You blink and the Indian temple fades. The humidity lifts. The air becomes drier, sharper, scented with dust and distance. You're on the move again, this time to the windswept grasslands of Central Asia around 1000 BCE. This is Scythian territory, and these people don't make cannabis drinks or grind it into medicine. They have a much more direct approach. They build small tents, throw cannabis on hot rocks, and basically hotbox themselves into spiritual experiences. Welcome to history's first documented cannabis vapor lounge. You're standing on a plain that stretches to the horizon in every direction. The grass is brown and tough, beaten down by constant wind. In the distance, you can see a group of horses, those small, hardy steppe horses that the Scythians ride with terrifying skill. And closer, you see the camp. The Scythians are nomads, which means they live in felt tents called yurts, travel constantly, and have a relationship with personal property that makes minimalism look cluttered. They're also warriors, fierce, skilled, and absolutely not the people you want to meet in a dark valley. But right now, they're not raiding or riding. They're preparing for a ritual. A group of men are setting up a small tent, barely large enough for 4 or 5 people. It's made of thick felt, designed to trap smoke. Inside, they place a small bronze brazier, a bowl on a stand, and heat stones in the fire until they're glowing. You've caught them on a funeral day. The Scythians take death seriously, and their burial rituals involve elaborate ceremonies that sometimes last days. Cannabis is central to the process, a way to honor the dead, cleanse the living, and create a connection between this world and whatever comes next. One of the warriors gestures for you to join them in the tent. You duck inside, immediately hit by the heat and the smell of felt and smoke. It's dark, cramped, and already warm from the heated stones. Then they bring out the cannabis. Not leaves or flowers carefully dried, but seeds and buds mixed together, stored in a leather pouch. They scatter a generous handful onto the hot stones. The effect is immediate. The stones hiss and smoke erupts, thick and pungent. Within seconds, the tent is filled with cannabis vapor. There's nowhere for it to go. No windows, no ventilation, just a small tent filled with 5 people and an astonishing amount of THC. You try to breathe slowly, but it doesn't matter. Every breath is cannabis. Your lungs fill with it. Your clothes absorb it. You're not smoking cannabis so much as becoming cannabis. The Scythians start chanting, low rhythmic sounds that you feel in your chest as much as hear. One of them has a small drum, and he taps out a pattern that seems to synchronize with your heartbeat. The smoke swirls in the dim light, filtering through the felt, creating patterns that your brain insists must be meaningful. And then it hits you, all at once. Not gradually like the bang, but like walking into a wall of pleasant confusion. Everything feels significant. The pattern of the smoke, the rhythm of the drum, the heat against your skin, the faces of the men around you, shadowed and strange. You understand suddenly why they do this. In a world of constant movement, constant danger, constant uncertainty, this tent is certainty. This ritual is connection. One of the warriors starts speaking. You don't understand the language, but the tone is clear. He's telling a story about the deceased, about their bravery, their humor, their place in the tribe. The others listen, occasionally adding their own memories, and through the smoke, it feels like the dead person is there with you, listening, approving. Is this spiritual? Is this just group intoxication creating a sense of shared experience? At this point, you're way too high to care about the distinction. Here's your quirky fact, and this one's actually incredible. In 2019, archaeologists excavating Scythian burial mounds in the Pamir Mountains found wooden braziers with cannabis residue still on them. Chemical analysis showed the cannabis was high in THC. These weren't hemp plants, but specifically psychoactive strains. The same burials also contained harps, meaning these funeral ceremonies weren't just smoky, they had live music. The original lo-fi beats to transcend reality too. You emerge from the tent an unknowable amount of time later. Could be an hour, could be 15 minutes. Time has become negotiable. The sky is huge out here, bigger than any sky you've ever seen. The stars are just beginning to appear, and there are so many of them, layered in depths your normal brain couldn't process. But right now, you're seeing them all, understanding in some wordless way that you're looking at light that left those stars before your great-great-great-grandparents were born. One of the Scythians offers you water from a leather skin. You drink, grateful. The world is slowly reassembling itself into familiar patterns, but you're changed. The ritual has marked you, if only temporarily. Greek historian Herodotus wrote about these Scythian rituals around 440 BCE, and his description matches what you just experienced. The Scythians take cannabis seed, creep into the tents, and throw it on the red-hot stones. It smoulders and sends up such billows of steam smoke that no Greek vapor bath could surpass it. The Scythians howl with joy in these vapor baths. Howl with joy is possibly the most dignified way to describe get absolutely blazed in a felt tent. But Herodotus was a classy guy. For a long time, scholars thought Herodotus was exaggerating, because of course he was. The Greeks loved a good story, and Greek historians especially loved making other cultures sound exotic and weird. But then archaeologists found the braziers, the cannabis residue, the burial goods, and suddenly Herodotus was vindicated. The Scythians really were doing exactly what he described. They really were using cannabis in funeral rituals. They really were, in Herodotus's words, howling with joy. You wander away from the camp, giving yourself space to come down from the experience. The grass crunches under your feet. The wind carries the smell of horses and smoke and the vast emptiness of the steppe. And you start to piece together the pattern. In India, cannabis was sacred, carefully prepared, woven into religious ritual. In China, it was medicinal and practical, used with precision and documentation. Here, on the Scythian steppe, it was tribal, communal, a way to bind the living to the dead and to each other. Same plant, completely different cultural contexts. This is what makes cannabis so fascinating historically. It's not just one thing. It adapts to every culture that encounters it, taking on whatever meaning that culture needs. For settled agricultural societies, it becomes medicine and rope. For nomadic warriors, it becomes ritual and remembrance. For religious seekers, it becomes a path to the divine. The plant doesn't change. We change it, or rather, we see in it whatever we're looking for. You sit down on the grass, your back against a large stone that still holds the warmth of the day. Above you, the stars continue their ancient patterns. The Scythians believed those stars were the souls of the honored dead, watching over the tribes below. Right now, slightly high and far from home, you're inclined to agree with them. In the distance, you hear horses. The Scythians are moving camp, as they always do, following the grass and the seasons. By tomorrow, this place will be empty except for the marks of their fires and the memories in the ground. But the smoke lingers. Always the smoke lingers. You close your eyes, breathing in the night air, and when you open them again, you're somewhere new. Part 3. The Merchant's Highway, 1000 BCE to 500 CE. The grasslands fade, replaced by something more structured. You smell spices before you see anything. Cinnamon, cardamom, something sharp and unfamiliar. When your vision clears, you're standing in a marketplace that seems to stretch forever in both directions. Welcome to the Silk Road. Not a road, really, but a network of trade routes connecting China to the Mediterranean, threading through Central Asia, Persia, and India. And moving along those routes, packed alongside silk, spices, and precious metals, is cannabis. The year is somewhere around 500 BCE, give or take a dynasty. You're in a caravanserai, a roadside inn where merchants rest, trade, and exchange more than just goods. They exchange ideas, stories, and yes, methods of getting pleasantly altered in the middle of nowhere. The caravanserai is built around a central courtyard. Camels are tethered in one corner, looking thoroughly unimpressed with everything, as camels do. Merchants from a dozen different regions sit in small groups, speaking languages that blend together into a musical confusion. You spot a Chinese trader examining Persian carpets. An Indian merchant shows jewelry to a Greek buyer. Two Arabs argue cheerfully over the price of jade. And in the corner, partially hidden behind stacked crates, a group of men are passing something between them. You drift closer, curiosity overcoming caution. They're smoking, not in a tent like the Scythians, but openly, using pipes made of wood and bone. The cannabis is different here, concentrated, pressed into small balls of resin. This is hashish, and it's new to you, even though people have been making it for centuries by this point. One of the merchants notices you watching. He's Persian, judging by his clothing, middle-aged with the weathered skin of someone who spends their life outdoors. He gestures to the pipe, offering, "You've come this far. Why stop now?" The hashish is stronger than anything you've experienced. The smoke is thick, almost oily, and the effect comes faster. Within minutes, the noise of the marketplace becomes a symphony. The camel's complaints are percussion. The merchant's haggling is melody. Even the wind through the caravanserai sounds intentional, musical. The Persian merchant smiles, recognizing the look on your face. First time? He asks, in a language that your brain helpfully translates. You nod. The Scythians showed us the plant, he explains, but we perfected it. Hashish is cannabis, concentrated. We separate the trichomes, the crystals on the flowers, and press them together. One small piece is worth 10 times the same weight in flowers. He's describing a process that won't have a scientific name for another 2,000 years, but he understands it perfectly. The Persians have turned cannabis into a science, and hashish is their masterpiece. We trade it, he continues, west to the Greeks and Egyptians, east to China, though they prefer their medicine liquid, south to India, though they already have their bang and don't see the need for improvement. He grins. But we know better. This is the future. Here's your quirky fact. The word hashish comes from the Arabic hashish, which literally means grass or herb. But it also became associated with the Hashashin, a secretive order of Nizari Ismailis in medieval Persia, who supposedly used hashish before carrying out political assassinations. Whether they actually did is debated by scholars. What's not debated is that the word assassin comes from hashashin, which means we literally named political murder after weed. History is weird. The hashish is making the marketplace feel dreamlike. Colours are too bright, sounds too clear. You watch a woman haggling over silk, and the way the fabric moves in her hands seems impossibly fluid, almost alive. The Persian merchant is still talking, explaining the roots. We get the best cannabis from the Hindu Kush mountains, he says. The plants there grow with more of the essence, the thing that changes your mind. In the lowlands, cannabis is good for rope. In the mountains, it's good for the soul. He's describing THC concentration without knowing about THC. The higher elevation and environmental stress of mountain growing causes cannabis plants to produce more psychoactive compounds as a defense mechanism. The ancients didn't know the chemistry, but they knew the result. Mountain weed hits different. From the Hindu Kush, we bring it here, he continues, gesturing to the caravanserai. From here, it travels everywhere. West to Egypt and Greece, east to China and beyond, north to the steppe tribes, though they have their own traditions, south to India, where it becomes bhang. The plant is everywhere, but the knowledge of how to use it, that travels too. And this is the magic of the Silk Road. It's not just moving products, it's moving culture, technique, understanding. A merchant from China learns Persian hash-making methods and brings them home. A Greek trader sees Scythian rituals and adapts them. An Indian ascetic traveling to Persia shares bhang recipes, which get modified and sent west. Cannabis culture is globalizing, centuries before anyone uses that word. You spend the evening in the caravanserai, drifting between groups. A Chinese doctor discusses cannabis's cooling properties according to traditional medicine. It balances yang, he explains, though too much can weaken qi. A Scythian trader demonstrates his portable felt tent, perfect for ritual fumigation on the road. An Egyptian merchant shows cannabis-infused oil he claims will cure everything from headaches to heartbreak. Some of it is medicine, some of it is snake oil, most of it is somewhere in between. As the sun sets, musicians begin to play. Someone has a stringed instrument that sounds like sadness and hope mixed together. Someone else has a drum, and without discussion or planning, people start to pass pipes and share hashish, and the caravanserai transforms into something between a party and a prayer service. This is the Silk Road at its finest. Strangers from different cultures, different religions, different worlds, all sitting together in the gathering darkness, sharing smoke and stories. The cannabis doesn't erase their differences. The Chinese merchant still thinks the Persians are too casual about spiritual matters, and the Scythian still finds everyone else too civilized and therefore suspect. But it softens the edges, creates space for curiosity instead of judgment, and for a few hours the caravanserai is its own small world, held together by trade, conversation, and the smoke rising into the desert night. You wake the next morning with a fuzzy head and a deep appreciation for water. The caravanserai is already bustling, merchants packing up, animals being loaded, deals being finalized in multiple languages simultaneously. The Persian merchant finds you before he leaves. You travel west or east, he asks. West, you say, not really knowing why, just feeling that the story is pulling you that direction. He nods. Good. The Greeks are discovering cannabis now. They call it cannabis from our word. They'll pretend they invented it, because Greeks pretend they invented everything. But they'll make it interesting. They always do. He presses something into your hand, a small ball of hashish wrapped in cloth. For the journey, he says. And remember, cannabis is not the destination, it's the vehicle. Where you go with it depends on you. And with that bit of philosophical wisdom that's either profound or just leftover high thoughts from last night, he's gone, joining his caravan heading east. You join one heading west, toward the Mediterranean, toward the classical world, toward civilizations that are about to have opinions about this plant. So many opinions. The caravan moves slowly, deliberately. You're walking alongside camels who are carrying what seems like impossible amounts of goods. Silk from China, spices from India, metalwork from Persia, and yes, cannabis in various forms. Hashish, mostly, but also seeds, dried flowers, and cannabis oil in sealed jars. The merchant leading this caravan is Greek, or at least Greek-influenced. He's from one of the Hellenized cities in the east, where Greek and Persian culture have blended into something new. He speaks multiple languages and worships multiple gods, with the easy syncretism of someone who's seen too much of the world to be dogmatic about anything. Cannabis, he tells you during a rest stop, is becoming fashionable in Athens. The physicians are interested. They've heard about its use in Persia and India. The philosophers are curious, because philosophers are curious about everything, especially things that change consciousness. And the common people just want something new to try. He pauses, taking a drink from his water skin. The problem is, Greeks make everything complicated. We can't just use something. We have to debate it, categorize it, assign it to the proper element and humor. Cannabis will arrive in Athens as a simple plant, and within a year, there will be 3 competing theories about its essential nature, and at least one play making fun of all of them. This turns out to be remarkably accurate. Time shifts. The caravan arrives in a Greek city, not Athens, but somewhere in Ionia, where Greek culture blends with Asian influences. The architecture is familiar from history books: white columns, open courtyards, statues of gods and heroes. You follow the cannabis through customs, where officials examine it with bureaucratic thoroughness. They're not banning it or even taxing it particularly high. They're just cataloguing it, because Greeks catalogue everything. The merchant sells most of his hashish to a physician named Dioscorides, who runs an apothecary near the agora. Dioscorides is young, enthusiastic, and deeply interested in pharmacology, the study of how substances affect the human body. Cannabis, he says, examining the hashish carefully. From the Eastern word, the Scythians use it in ritual fumigation. The Persians concentrate it into this form. The Indians make it into drinks. But what does it actually do? He's not asking philosophically. He wants to experiment, observe, document. This is Greek science at its birth. The idea that you can study nature systematically and understand its principles. Over the next weeks, you watch as Dioscorides tests cannabis on willing subjects. He documents that it causes warmth and dries the humours. He notes that it can relieve pain, particularly earaches and inflammation. He records that excessive use leads to diminishment of seed, which is ancient Greek for might affect your sex drive, probably. His notes will eventually become part of De Materia Medica, a pharmaceutical text that will be used for over 1,500 years. Cannabis gets an entry, described accurately but without excitement. It's medicine, useful but not miraculous. But parallel to the medical interest is something else. You start hearing stories about symposia, Greek drinking parties that are part social gathering, part philosophical salon, part excuse to recline on couches and discuss the nature of reality until someone passes out. And at some of these symposia, particularly the ones hosted by younger, more adventurous Greeks, cannabis is appearing. You're invited to one, the benefits of being a time-traveling observer with no fixed identity, and you accept, because when will you get another chance to attend an ancient Greek party? The symposium is held in a wealthy merchant's home. The room is arranged with couches in a square, allowing everyone to see everyone else. There's food, of course, olives, cheese, bread, fish, but the main event is wine, mixed with water in the civilized Greek fashion. Except tonight, there's something else. The host, a man named Theodoros, who's made his fortune in trade, has acquired some Persian hashish, and he's curious. The Persians claim it opens the mind, he announces to the gathered guests. The Indians say it reveals the divine. The Scythians howl with joy in its vapors. Shall we test these claims? The guests, a mix of merchants, a minor philosopher, a poet, and a physician, agree with the enthusiasm of people who've already consumed enough wine to think this is a great idea. Theodoros brings out a bronze brazier and places small amounts of hashish on heated coals, just like the Scythians, though in a much more refined setting. The smoke rises, and the Greeks, being Greeks, lean in and inhale deliberately, analytically, taking mental notes on the experience. The effects take time, but when they hit, the room's energy shifts. The poet starts speaking in verse about the nature of light, comparing it to water flowing upward. The philosopher begins a long discourse on whether altered consciousness reveals truth or merely distorts perception. Someone else is examining their hand with deep fascination, muttering about the mathematical perfection of fingers. And the physician, true to his profession, is taking notes. Increased perception of sensory details, he mutters. Alteration of time sense, enhanced pattern recognition, possibly leading to false significance assigned to random phenomena. The party continues for hours. The conversations grow increasingly abstract. Someone proposes that reality is just the dream of a god who's currently asleep. Someone else suggests that dreams are actually glimpses into parallel worlds. A third person insists that none of this matters because everything is made of atoms anyway, and atoms don't care about our philosophical problems. It's simultaneously the most and least productive conversation you've ever witnessed. Here's the thing about Greeks and cannabis. They never fully embraced it the way other cultures did. It remained niche, slightly exotic, more of a curiosity than a cultural staple. The Greeks preferred their wine, their philosophy unassisted, their alterations of consciousness to come through rhetoric and reason rather than substances. But they documented cannabis thoroughly, and their writings, preserved and copied and translated over centuries, carried knowledge of the plant into Europe's intellectual tradition. As the symposium winds down, several guests have fallen asleep on their couches, the poet is still muttering about light water, and the philosopher has given up on consciousness and is now just hungry. You slip out into the night. The Greek city is quiet at this hour. Stars overhead, the same stars the Scythians saw, the same stars that guided caravans along the Silk Road. The smoke from the symposium drifts out into the night air, dissipating into nothing. And you realize that cannabis has now spread from the steppes of Central Asia to the philosophical salons of Greece. From Scythian funeral tents to Indian temples to Persian caravanserais to Greek drinking parties. The plant has traveled thousands of miles, adapted to dozens of cultures, been made into rope and medicine and ritual and recreation, and it's still spreading, still adapting, still finding new meanings in new contexts. The story is far from over. In fact, it's barely begun. You walk through the quiet streets, your mind still processing everything you've seen. And when you turn the corner, expecting to see more Greek architecture, you instead find yourself somewhere completely different. Time has shifted again. The air smells of incense and old stone. Welcome to ancient Rome, and the Romans, as usual, have opinions. Part 4. Empire and Prohibition, 0 CE to 1000 CE. The white marble of Athens fades, replaced by something grander, more imposing. You're standing in Rome now, somewhere around 100 CE, at the height of the empire's power. The city sprawls in every direction, 1 million people packed into an urban maze of temples, markets, apartment blocks, and monuments designed to remind everyone of Rome's eternal glory. And cannabis is here too, though Rome treats it the way Rome treats everything, practically, commercially, and with a healthy dose of moral judgment. You're in a shop near the Tiber River, a merchant establishment that sells imported goods from across the empire and beyond. The walls are lined with amphorae, jars, and sacks labelled in Latin and Greek. Silk from China, spices from India, olive oil from Spain, and in the back corner, quietly and without fanfare, cannabis. The merchant is a freedman, a former slave who's earned his freedom and built a business through shrewd trading and careful networking. He's explaining his inventory to a customer, a wealthy matron looking for remedies for her husband's gout. Hemp fibre, of course, for rope and sail canvas, he says, gesturing to bales of the stuff stacked against one wall. Essential for the navy, for merchants, for anyone who needs strong cordage. We import it from Egypt and Anatolia, though some now grows in Gaul. The customer nods impatiently. She doesn't care about rope. For medicinal purposes, the merchant continues, we have cannabis oil, prepared according to Greek methods, good for inflammation, pain of the joints, and women's complaints. This last phrase covers everything from menstrual cramps to menopause, to general dissatisfaction with life, which Roman medicine treats with equal parts herbs and condescension. The matron purchases a small vial, paying without haggling, which means she's either wealthy or desperate, possibly both. After she leaves, the merchant turns to you. "You're looking for something else," he says. It's not a question. You nod. He glances toward the door, checking for unwanted ears, then reaches under the counter and pulls out a small package wrapped in leather. Hashish, Persian quality, very expensive, very effective, and very illegal if you're caught using it for anything other than medicine. Illegal, you ask? Cannabis has been many things on this journey, but illegal is new. Not officially, he clarifies. The Senate hasn't banned it, but public intoxication is frowned upon, and cannabis intoxication is particularly suspect. Wine is civilized, Roman. Everything else is foreign, and therefore potentially corrupting. This is your introduction to cannabis prohibition, Roman style. It's not about the plant itself. Rome is perfectly happy to use hemp for industrial purposes, and physicians prescribe cannabis oil regularly. It's about who uses it and how. Proper Romans might use it medicinally. Foreign types might use it recreationally. The line is fuzzy, but the judgment is clear. You wander through Rome over the next days, watching how cannabis exists in the empire's shadow economy. It's not hidden exactly, but it's not celebrated either. Physicians use it. Soldiers returning from Eastern campaigns sometimes bring hashish back with them. Certain mystery cults, always operating on the edge of legality, incorporate it into their rituals. But mainstream Roman culture doesn't embrace it. The Romans have wine for social bonding, opium for pain relief, and an absolute conviction that their way of life is superior to everyone else's. Cannabis is foreign, Eastern, vaguely suspicious in the way everything Eastern is vaguely suspicious. You visit a therme, a Roman bathhouse, where a group of men are relaxing after their bath, lounging in the tepidarium and discussing politics. One of them, a veteran of the Eastern campaigns, mentions that Syrian soldiers use cannabis. They smoke it before battle, he says, not quite disapprovingly but not quite approving either. Claim it steadies their nerves, makes them fearless, makes them stupid, another man retorts. A soldier needs clarity, not clouds in his head. Yet they fight well enough, the veteran counters. Perhaps there's something to it. The conversation moves on. Romans love debating everything, but the exchange captures Rome's ambivalence perfectly. Cannabis works, demonstrably. But it's not Roman, and therefore it's not quite proper. Here's your quirky fact. Pliny the Elder, the famous Roman naturalist, wrote about cannabis in his Natural History around 77 CE. He describes its use for rope, medicine, and notes that cannabis grows wild in many places. He also mentions that it can cause headaches and diminish generative powers, which is Roman for might affect your ability to have children. Whether this is accurate or just Roman anti-drug propaganda is still debated. Time moves forward. The empire is changing. Christianity is spreading, bringing with it new ideas about morality, the body and consciousness. You're in Rome again, but it's now the 4th century CE. Constantine has converted to Christianity. The empire is officially Christian, or becoming so, and the cultural landscape is shifting in ways that will echo for millennia. A Christian monk, one of the new ascetic types who've started withdrawing from cities to live in simplicity and prayer, is giving a sermon in a church that was a pagan temple just decades ago. His message is clear. The body is a temple, consciousness is sacred, and anything that alters your God-given state of mind is suspect. The pagans indulge in wines and herbs that cloud judgment, he says, his voice carrying through the stone building. They seek false visions, demonic whispers disguised as divine truth. But we, followers of Christ, seek clarity, sobriety of mind and body. We need no substances to find God. Prayer is sufficient. Faith is sufficient. The congregation nods. This message resonates in a world that's increasingly seeing the material world as dangerous, the body as something to be controlled, and pleasure as a potential sin. Cannabis, already marginal in Roman culture, becomes even more suspect under Christian influence. It's not banned outright. The church doesn't have that power yet, and besides, hemp is still too useful economically. But it's morally questionable, associated with pagans, with Eastern religions, with the kinds of altered states that might invite demonic influence. You talk to a Christian physician after the service. He's caught in an interesting bind. He knows cannabis works medicinally, has seen it relieve suffering, but his faith tells him that altering consciousness is spiritually dangerous. I use it sparingly, he confesses, only when other remedies fail, and I pray before administering it, asking God to purify it of any demonic influence. The plant itself is God's creation, therefore good, but the uses to which it can be put, those are human choices, and humans are fallen. This theological knot, the plant is good, the use might be bad, the intention matters, but also maybe the substance itself is corrupting, will define Western cannabis attitudes for the next 1500 years. But while Christianity is conquering Rome, something else is happening in the East. You feel the pull eastward, back toward Persia, toward the territories that Rome never quite managed to conquer. The scene shifts. You're in Persia now, around 500 CE. The Sassanid Empire is flourishing. Zoroastrianism is the dominant religion, and cannabis has a completely different status than it does in Christian Rome. Here, cannabis is part of religious ritual. Zoroastrian priests use it in ceremonies, believing the smoke carries prayers to Ahura Mazda, the supreme deity. It's not recreational. The Zoroastrians are serious about their faith, but it's not forbidden either. It's sacred, carefully controlled, woven into liturgy. You attend a ceremony in a fire temple. The eternal flame burns in the center, tended by priests who've studied for years to earn this honor. The air smells of burning sandalwood and other incenses you can't identify. And yes, cannabis smoke, though it's mixed with other herbs and burned in specific ritual patterns. A priest explains that cannabis helps purify the mind, preparing it to receive divine wisdom. We do not use it for pleasure, he emphasizes. That would be sacrilege, but used properly, with prayer and intention, it opens the soul to truth. Same plant, completely different cultural meaning. In Rome, it's suspect, foreign, potentially demonic. In Persia, it's sacred, traditional, a gift from the divine. The difference isn't in the chemistry, it's in the stories cultures tell about it. You're pulled forward again, time sliding past like water. The Roman Empire has fallen. The western half has collapsed into successor kingdoms. The eastern half, Byzantium, persists, but transformed. And in the Arabian Peninsula, something new is rising. Welcome to the Islamic Golden Age. You're in Baghdad now, around 800 CE. The Abbasid Caliphate is at its peak, and the city is a wonder of the world. Libraries, universities, hospitals, and markets that would make Rome at its height look provincial. Scholars from across the known world gather here to study mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy. And cannabis is here too, though its status is complicated. Islam forbids alcohol explicitly. The Quran is clear on this. Wine is haram, forbidden, a source of moral corruption. But cannabis, the Quran doesn't mention it, which means it exists in a legal and theological grey area that Islamic scholars have been arguing about for centuries. You find yourself in a majlis, a gathering of scholars and poets in a wealthy patron's home. They're discussing philosophy, reciting poetry, and yes, some of them are consuming hashish. One scholar argues that cannabis should be forbidden by analogy to wine. It intoxicates, therefore it's haram. Another counters that the Quran forbids wine specifically because wine causes aggression and clouds judgment, whereas cannabis causes peace and contemplation. A third suggests that intention matters. Used medicinally or spiritually, it's permissible. Used for mere pleasure, it's suspect. They've been having this exact debate for 200 years. They'll continue having it for centuries more. But while the scholars argue, the poets and mystics embrace it. The Sufis, Islamic mystics seeking direct experience of the divine, particularly value cannabis as a tool for meditation and spiritual insight. You meet a Sufi sheikh in a quieter corner of the city. He's old, weathered, with eyes that seem to look through you rather than at you. He invites you to sit, offers tea, and without asking if you want it, prepares a small amount of hashish. The scholars argue, he says, his voice soft but certain. They measure and weigh and debate. This is good. God gave us reason. We should use it. But they miss the essential truth. Everything is from God. The plant, the insight it brings, the dangers of misuse, all from God. Our task is not to forbid, but to use wisely. He lights the hashish in a small clay pipe, takes a long draw, and passes it to you. In Sufism, we seek to annihilate the self, to dissolve the ego that separates us from God. Some do this through prayer alone, some through music and dance, some through fasting, and some find that cannabis, used with intention and guidance, helps quiet the constant chatter of the mind. The hashish here is refined, potent, nothing like the rough preparations you encountered earlier. The effect is immediate and profound. The cluttered room becomes a geometry lesson, every angle and shadow perfectly arranged. The sheikh's words seem to resonate at multiple levels simultaneously. This is the danger, he continues. The plant shows you that consciousness is flexible, that the self you think is solid is actually fluid. For someone unprepared, this is terrifying. They cling to their ego, and the experience becomes paranoia, fear. But for someone who has studied, who understands that the self is an illusion anyway, he trails off, smiling. Then it's just a reminder, a gentle teacher showing you what you already knew but forgot. This is cannabis as mysticism, not rebellion, not recreation, but a deliberate spiritual tool used within a centuries-old tradition of seeking divine union. Here's your quirky fact. The word assassin probably doesn't come from hashish, despite the popular etymology. The Hashashin, or Nizari Ismailis, were a secretive order in medieval Persia who carried out political killings. European crusaders heard the name Hashashin and assumed it referred to hashish use, but modern scholars think it's more likely from Asasiyun, meaning people who are faithful to the foundation. But the legend was too good to die, so we ended up with assassin anyway. History loves a good story more than it loves accuracy. The centuries roll past. The Islamic Golden Age peaks and begins its slow decline. The Mongols sack Baghdad. The Crusaders come and go, bringing back stories of hashish using mystics and assassins, stories that will shape European attitudes for centuries. Through all of this, cannabis persists. In the Islamic world, it remains controversial but present, banned in some periods, tolerated in others, always existing in that grey area between medicine, mysticism, and vice. You watch as cannabis culture becomes more sophisticated, methods of preparation improve, hashish becomes an art form, with connoisseurs debating the merits of different regions and preparation techniques the way wine enthusiasts debate vintages. Stories and poems about hashish circulate. Some praise it as a key to wisdom. Others condemn it as a path to laziness and moral decay. The same debates, the same arguments, repeated in every generation. And through it all, the plant spreads. It reaches North Africa with Arab traders. It moves into sub-Saharan Africa along trade routes. It's cultivated in Persia, Afghanistan, and what will later be called the Hindu Kush, mountain regions where the climate produces particularly potent varieties. By the year 1000 CE, cannabis has been used by humans for nearly 10,000 years. It's been rope and medicine, sacrament and intoxicant, tool and teacher. It's been legal and illegal, sacred and profane, praised and condemned. And it's still just getting started. You feel time shifting again, pulling you forward into new territories. The air changes, becoming cooler, damper. The smell of incense fades, replaced by wood smoke and something cooking. When your vision clears, you're in medieval Europe. And the Europeans, as you're about to discover, have their own special relationship with cannabis. It involves guilt, prohibition, and a lot of people pretending they're only using it for rope. Part 5. The Medieval Confusion, 1000 CE to 1500 CE. The first thing you notice about medieval Europe is how cold it is. And how it smells. Not bad exactly, just very organic. Wood smoke, animals, unwashed humans, and the vague scent of things fermenting in ways that may or may not be intentional. You're in a monastery somewhere in France, around 1100 CE. Stone walls, narrow windows, and a pervasive sense that God is watching and is probably disappointed. Monks move through the corridors with silent purpose, their habits swishing against the floor. And in the garden, among the medicinal herbs carefully cultivated and labelled, you find cannabis. It's not called that here. The monks call it hemp, or chanvre in French, and they grow it for entirely practical purposes. Or at least, that's what they tell themselves and their abbots. A young monk is tending the plants. He's maybe 20, with the kind of face that suggests he's never had an impure thought in his life. But when you ask about the cannabis, his expression becomes carefully neutral. We grow it for rope, he says, which is true, and for paper, to copy scriptures. Also true. And the seeds are nutritious, good for strengthening the body during fasts. Still true. And medicinally, you prompt. He glances around, checking for senior monks, then nods. The infirmera uses it for various ailments. Pain, sleeplessness, women's troubles. He pauses. And sometimes, when a brother is particularly troubled in spirit, when prayer alone doesn't bring peace, a tea of hemp flowers can provide relief. This is medieval code for we're microdosing monks to deal with the crushing weight of celibacy and monastic discipline. He leads you to the infirmary, where an older monk is preparing medicines. The infirmera is surrounded by dried herbs, jars of oils, and books, precious books, hand-copied medical texts from Greek and Arabic sources. Cannabis, he says, showing you an entry in one manuscript. It's a copy of Dioscorides, the Greek physician you met centuries ago, still considered authoritative 1,000 years later. Good for inflammation, earaches, and calming of troubled spirits. We prepare it as a tea or tincture, sometimes mixed with wine. The church approves? You ask. He gives you a look that suggests you've asked a very complicated question. The church approves of healing. The church approves of medicine. Cannabis is medicine. Therefore, he shrugs. We don't advertise, but we don't hide it either. God made all plants, some for food, some for healing. This one happens to do both. This is the medieval European relationship with cannabis in a nutshell. It's useful, probably acceptable if you squint right, and best not discussed too loudly. Outside the monastery, in the wider medieval world, hemp is everywhere. You visit a port city, let's say Venice, because Venice in the Middle Ages is basically the Amazon of Europe, trading everything with everyone. The harbour is full of ships, and every ship is held together with hemp, rope, sails, caulking. The maritime industry runs on cannabis fibre. Without it, there's no trade, no fishing, no naval power. Hemp is strategic, essential, absolutely critical to medieval commerce. A rope maker shows you his workshop. It's a long, narrow building designed to accommodate the rope-making process. He takes raw hemp fibres, rough, tough, smelling faintly vegetal, and twists them together, walking backward down the length of the workshop as the rope forms. Best fibre there is, he says proudly. Stronger than flax, more resistant to rot than wool. Lasts years if treated properly. Every ship in this harbour is held together with my rope. He doesn't know about the flowers, or if he does, he doesn't care. To him, cannabis is a crop, like wheat or flax. Useful, profitable, entirely mundane. But in the city's back alleys, in the homes of midwives and folk healers, a different cannabis culture persists. You follow rumours to a woman known locally as a healer, though the church would probably use a different word. Witch comes to mind. Her home is small, packed with hanging herbs and mysterious jars. She's old, weathered, with the confident manner of someone who's helped enough people that persecution doesn't frighten her as much as it should. Cannabis for women's pain, she says matter-of-factly. Childbirth, monthly troubles, the change of life. Mix it with valerian and chamomile, make a tea. Helps with the pain, helps with the fear. Men don't understand, but women do. She's been using cannabis in her practice for decades, knowledge passed down from her mother and grandmother. It's folk medicine, unwritten, transmitted orally, always one generation away from being lost. The priests don't approve, she continues. They say pain in childbirth is Eve's punishment, that we should suffer as she suffered. But I say God also made plants that ease suffering, which is the greater sin, using God's creation or letting someone suffer unnecessarily. It's a good question, one that medieval theologians have been arguing about for centuries. Is pain redemptive? Is relief from pain a rejection of God's will? Or is healing itself a form of grace? The church hasn't decided, which means individuals make their own choices, quietly, and hope the local priest doesn't ask too many questions. Here's your quirky fact for this era. Medieval monks created some of the earliest cannabis-infused alcohol. They would steep hemp flowers in wine or beer, creating what they called holy hemp ale, or similar names. Was it recreational? Was it medicinal? Was it just monks being creative during long, boring winters? Probably all three. The recipes have mostly been lost, but a few survive in monastery records, usually labelled something like Brother Johannes's special tonic for melancholy. Time moves forward. You're in the 14th century now, and Europe is about to have a very bad time. The Black Death is sweeping through, killing a third of the population, and society is responding with a mix of prayer, panic, and looking for someone to blame. Cannabis doesn't cause the plague, Rats and fleas get that honor, but it becomes part of the apocalyptic atmosphere in weird ways. Some healers claim cannabis smoke can ward off plague. Burn it in your house, they say, and the bad air, miasma they call it, will be purified. This doesn't work because the plague isn't caused by bad air, but people are desperate enough to try anything. Others claim that cannabis use weakens the body, making people more susceptible to disease. Also not true, but during a plague, everyone's looking for explanations. And in the chaos, with traditional authority breaking down and death everywhere, some people just want relief, want to feel something other than fear. Cannabis use increases, quietly, in the corners where authorities aren't watching. You meet a group of survivors in a village that's been decimated by plague. Half the population is dead. The church is empty except for hasty graves. The Lord is dead, his heirs arguing over inheritance. And in the evening, the survivors gather in what used to be the tavern. Someone has cannabis, acquired from where they don't say. They prepare it as a tea, sharing one cup among them, and for a few hours, they remember how to laugh, how to tell stories, how to feel like humans instead of just survivors. It's not recreational in the modern sense. It's communal grief therapy, medicated with the only thing they have that might help. The 15th century arrives, bringing with it the Renaissance, the printing press, and a renewed interest in classical knowledge. Scholars are rediscovering Greek and Roman texts, including medical works that discuss cannabis. You're in Italy now, in a university city. A young physician is studying, preparing for his medical examinations. His textbooks include Arabic medical treatises, the most advanced medical knowledge available, and these discuss cannabis extensively. The Arab physicians understood it better than we do, he admits, showing you a text by Avicenna. They documented its properties carefully. Too cooling, according to the humoral theory, which means it's good for hot diseases, fevers, inflammation, but dangerous for cold diseases. Medieval medicine operates on the theory that the body contains 4 humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, and health is about keeping them in balance. Different substances affect different humours. Cannabis, being cold and dry, has specific uses and contraindications. It's complete nonsense from a modern medical perspective, but it's the best they have, and it does lead to careful observation of effects. The physician continues. We also know from the Greeks and Arabs that excessive use can cause problems, weakening of the mind, reduction of memory, lethargy. So it must be used carefully, in proper doses, under medical supervision. This is Renaissance medicine at its finest, careful, systematic, completely wrong about why things work, but empirically correct about what they do. But while physicians are getting academic about cannabis, explorers are getting ready to spread it to entirely new continents. It's 1492. Christopher Columbus is loading his ships for a voyage that will accidentally discover the Americas. And among the provisions, hemp rope, miles of it. Without hemp, there's no sailing to the New World. You watch the ships depart from Spain, their hemp sails full of wind, their hemp rigging holding everything together. Columbus has no idea that he's about to introduce cannabis to 2 continents that have never seen it before. But that's a story for later. Right now, you're being pulled forward again, time accelerating, carrying you past the age of exploration and into something new, something colonial, something involving multiple continents, enslaved people, and a plant that's about to become political in ways no one expected. Part 6. The Colonial Exchange, 1500 CE to 1800 CE. You land with a thud on wooden planks. The world rocks beneath you. You're on a ship, clearly, somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The smell is overwhelming. Salt water, tar, unwashed bodies, and below deck, something worse. Human suffering. This is a slave ship, 17th century, crossing from West Africa to the Americas. And you're about to learn how cannabis became tangled with one of history's greatest horrors. The ship's cargo includes enslaved Africans, stolen from their homes and packed into conditions that barely qualify as survival, but also in the hold, seeds. All kinds of seeds, because while Europeans are stealing people, they're also stealing agriculture. And among those seeds, cannabis. You won't stay on this ship. The horror is too much, even for a time traveler. But you need to understand, cannabis didn't come to the Americas just as hemp for European settlers. It also came with enslaved Africans who knew the plant from their homelands and carried that knowledge despite carrying nothing else. Time shifts. You're in the Caribbean now, on a sugar plantation in Jamaica, around 1700. The plantation is brutal. Enslaved people work under conditions designed to extract maximum labor before death. The owners are wealthy beyond measure. The enslaved are property, less than human in the eyes of the law. But at night, in the quarters, culture survives. Music, stories, and yes, plants. You find an old woman tending a small garden plot behind the quarters. Officially, enslaved people are allowed these plots to grow food, reducing the cost of feeding them. Unofficially, they grow other things too, including cannabis. She sees you watching and doesn't speak at first. Trust is dangerous here. But eventually she explains in a language that mixes African roots with plantation English. We call it ganja, she says. Brought from Africa, from home. Good for pain, for sleep, for forgetting for a little while how bad things are. The overseers don't mind, you ask. She laughs, bitter. They mind everything, but they can't watch every moment, and some plants look like others to eyes that don't know. We hide it among the vegetables, use it careful, share it quiet. This is cannabis as resistance. Not armed rebellion, that gets you killed, but cultural survival. Holding on to knowledge, practices, identity in the face of systematic dehumanization. Later, you learn more. Enslaved Africans didn't just use cannabis medicinally, they incorporated it into what religious practices they could maintain. In what would become Rastafarianism centuries later, ganja becomes sacramental, a connection to Africa, to identity, to something the plantation owners couldn't steal. Here's your quirky fact. The word ganja comes from Sanskrit, which seems weird until you remember that Indian indentured labourers were also brought to the Caribbean in the 19th century after slavery ended. They brought their word for cannabis, which mixed with African practices, creating a unique Caribbean cannabis culture that blends multiple traditions. Time shifts. You're in colonial Virginia now, around 1650. Very different from Jamaica, at least on the surface. Here, cannabis is legal. Not just legal, mandatory. Farmers are required by law to grow hemp for the colony. It's too valuable not to. Every ship, every rope, every sail needs hemp fibre. The colony's survival depends on it. You visit a plantation, a very different plantation from Jamaica, though still built on enslaved labour. The owner is showing off his hemp fields with obvious pride. Best cash crop besides tobacco, he says. England pays well for quality hemp. The Navy needs it desperately. Can't maintain an empire without rope, and can't make rope without hemp. He's right. The British Empire literally runs on hemp fibre. Ships can't sail without it. Hemp is strategic, military, absolutely essential. Do you use it medicinally, you ask? He shrugs. Sometimes. My wife makes a tincture for her nerves, but mostly it's industrial. Good honest work, good honest profit. What he doesn't mention: his enslaved workers know about the flowers, know what happens when you smoke them, and sometimes do exactly that when they have a rare moment of privacy. Knowledge circulates in slave quarters the way it does in any oppressed community, quietly, carefully, shared only with trusted people. You meet one of the enslaved workers later, away from the owner's eyes. He's originally from West Africa, brought here as a teenager, now middle-aged and hardened by decades of brutal work. The white folks don't know the plant, he says quietly. They grow it for rope, don't look at the flowers except to complain when we don't cut it fast enough. But we know. From home, from the old ones who remember. He shows you a small pipe, carved from wood, hidden in his quarters. Smoke it sometimes, when the work is done and the overseers are drunk. Helps the pain, helps forget, just for a little while, that I used to be free. This is the double life of cannabis in colonial America. For white colonists, industrial crop, occasionally medicinal, thoroughly respectable. For enslaved Africans, cultural memory, small rebellion, connection to a life before. The same plant, completely different meanings. Time accelerates. You're bouncing through the 18th century now, watching cannabis spread through the colonies and back to Europe in new forms. In India, the British East India Company is realizing that cannabis is hugely popular and potentially very profitable. They start studying it, documenting it, trying to figure out if they should tax it or ban it. The British, being British, form a commission. The Indian Hemp Drugs Commission spends years studying cannabis use in India, interviewing thousands of people, producing a massive report that concludes cannabis isn't particularly dangerous, banning it would be impossible and counterproductive, but it should definitely be taxed because tax revenue is lovely. You read parts of the report. It's surprisingly reasonable, acknowledging that cannabis has medical value, that moderate use isn't harmful, that the dangers have been vastly overstated. It's one of the most comprehensive drug studies ever conducted, and its conclusions are basically, it's fine, calm down. The British, of course, ignore their own report whenever convenient and continue cracking down on cannabis when it suits colonial interests. But the research exists, documented, available to future scholars who will marvel at how people knew better 150 years ago and made bad policy anyway. Meanwhile, in Europe, cannabis is having a fashionable moment. French soldiers returning from Napoleon's Egypt campaign bring hashish back with them, and Paris, being Paris, becomes obsessed. You find yourself in 1840s Paris, in a literary salon, where artists and writers gather to experiment with hashish. The Club des Hashishins, the Hash Club, meets regularly to consume cannabis in the form of dawamesk, a jam-like preparation that's basically hash mixed with honey and spices. The members include some of the biggest names in French literature: Baudelaire, Gautier, Dumas. They treat hashish as a window into creativity, a way to explore consciousness and produce better art. Théophile Gautier is describing his experience with the kind of flowery prose that only 19th century French writers can pull off. I felt myself dissolving and becoming transparent. I clearly saw inside my body the hashish I had eaten, in the form of an emerald from which millions of tiny sparks were radiating. Someone else is painting watercolors that, honestly, aren't very good, but they're very confident about them. Baudelaire, the poet, is more skeptical. Hashish reveals nothing new, he writes later. It simply magnifies your existing nature. For a wise man, it may bring insights. For a fool, it simply makes a larger fool. This is cannabis as artistic experimentation, wrapped in Orientalism, the Western fascination with exotic Eastern practices. The French are trying hashish the way they try everything from Egypt, with enthusiasm, condescension, and absolutely zero understanding of the cultural context they're stealing it from. But they do write about it extensively, creating a literary record that will shape European attitudes for decades. Here's your quirky fact for this era. Queen Victoria's personal physician, J.R. Reynolds, prescribed cannabis tincture for her menstrual cramps. Yes, really. The Queen, who presided over the British Empire at its peak, was periodically treating her period pain with weed. Reynolds wrote medical papers praising cannabis as one of the most valuable medicines available. But because it was the Queen's doctor prescribing it for medical reasons, it was perfectly respectable. Again, same plant, meaning depends on context. By the late 1700s, cannabis exists in multiple parallel realities. In Asia, still traditional, sacred in some contexts, medicinal in others, recreational in others, always woven into ancient cultures. In the Middle East, controversial in Islamic law, but widely used anyway, part of Sufi mysticism, part of daily life for many. In the Americas, industrial hemp for white colonists, cultural preservation for enslaved Africans, increasingly medicinal as tinctures become popular. In Europe, industrial fiber, exotic intoxicant for the wealthy, medicine for those who can afford physicians. The plant hasn't changed. It's still cannabis sativa, same chemical compounds, same effects. But it means something different on every continent, in every culture, to every person who encounters it. And as the 19th century approaches, bringing with it industrialization, colonialism at its peak, and the beginning of modern drug policy, cannabis is about to get even more complicated. You feel time shifting again, pulling you towards something new. The Industrial Revolution is coming. Modern medicine is emerging. And cannabis is about to be caught in the crossfire between progress and prohibition. Part 7. Modern Medicine and Moral Panic, 1800 CE to 1920 CE. The 19th century arrives with the sound of steam engines and the smell of coal smoke. You're in London now, Victorian England, where progress and prudishness exist in perfect tension. The city is transforming. Gas lights are replacing candles. Railways are connecting distant towns. Medicine is becoming scientific, moving from folk remedies and humoral theory towards something resembling modern practice. And cannabis is everywhere in the pharmacies. You walk into a chemist's shop in a respectable London neighbourhood. The shelves are lined with bottles, all carefully labelled in precise Victorian handwriting. And there, among the laudanum, opium, bismuth for stomach troubles, and mercury preparations for everything, despite being poisonous, you find cannabis tinctures. Cannabis indica extract, the label reads, for relief of nervous disorders, sleeplessness, and female complaints. Dosage, 15 drops in water before bed. The pharmacist, a serious man in a pristine white coat, explains. Very popular, he says. Physicians prescribe it regularly. Safer than opium, less likely to cause dependency. Excellent for pain, muscle spasms, and anxiety. He's not wrong. Victorian medicine has figured out that cannabis, while psychoactive, is relatively safe. You can't fatally overdose on it. It doesn't create the desperate physical addiction that opium does. And for certain conditions, chronic pain, insomnia, anxiety, it works remarkably well. We sell more of it every year, the pharmacist continues, especially to ladies, for monthly troubles, you understand. He looks vaguely uncomfortable discussing women's health, but pushes through. And for childbirth pain, some midwives swear by it. Cannabis tinctures are so common that you can buy them at any pharmacy, no prescription required. They're advertised in newspapers alongside ads for soap and shoes. Traveling Medicine shows sell cannabis-laced tonics promising relief from everything imaginable. This is peak cannabis respectability. It's medicine, properly bottled and labelled, prescribed by real doctors, sold by legitimate pharmacists. The Victorians, for all their prudishness, have decided cannabis is acceptable as long as it's medicinal and properly British. But across the Atlantic, in America, the story is more complicated. You're in New York now, around 1850. The city is growing explosively, packed with immigrants from Ireland, Germany, Italy, China. Each group brings their own customs, and those customs sometimes include cannabis. Chinese immigrants smoke opium, which Americans find exotic and threatening. Irish workers drink heavily, which Americans find familiar and tolerable. And various groups use cannabis in ways that make American authorities increasingly nervous. The cannabis itself is legal. You can buy it in any drugstore, just like in London. But the way certain people use it, that's becoming problematic. You visit a pharmacy in a working-class neighbourhood. The pharmacist is Irish. His customers a mix of ethnicities. He sells cannabis extract for medicine, hemp seed for bird food, and occasionally, quietly, hashish to customers who ask the right way. The respectable folks use tinctures, he explains quietly. Take it for sleep, for pain, all very proper. But some folks, he lowers his voice, some folks smoke it, like tobacco, but different, usually foreigners, Mexican labourers sometimes, Chinese workers, sailors from everywhere. There's a class divide emerging, middle-class white Americans. Cannabis tinctures are fine, medicinal, respectable. Working-class immigrants. Cannabis smoking is foreign, suspicious, potentially corrupting. This divide will matter. A lot. Because American drug policy isn't being written by doctors or scientists. It's being written by people with opinions about immigration, race, and social control. Meanwhile, back in India, the British are conducting that massive cannabis study we mentioned earlier. The Indian Hemp Drugs Commission, formed in 1893, spends years investigating cannabis use. You sit in on some of their interviews. They talk to doctors, religious leaders, regular users, police officers, anyone with opinions about cannabis. The testimonies are remarkably varied. A physician: I have used cannabis preparations in my practice for 20 years. Excellent for pain, fever, and dysentery. Safer than opium. I see no reason to prohibit it. A religious ascetic: Ganja is a gift from Shiva. It aids meditation and devotion. To ban it would be sacrilege. A policeman: excessive use causes some problems, yes, but so does excessive use of anything. Most users are moderate and cause no trouble. The Commission's conclusion, published in 1894, is surprisingly sane. Total prohibition is neither necessary nor expedient. Moderate use produces no harmful effects. The injury from hemp drugs is not serious compared to that from alcohol. They recommend regulation and taxation, not prohibition. The British government reads this report, nods thoughtfully, and then continues doing whatever serves colonial interests, regardless of the evidence. But the report exists. It's thorough, comprehensive, based on actual research rather than moral panic, and it will be ignored for the next 100 years. Here's your quirky fact. In the late 1800s, cannabis was marketed specifically for women's health problems. Products like Dr. Brown's sedative tablets and one-day cough cure contained cannabis extracts and were advertised with reassuring Victorian language about female weakness and nervous complaints. Some of these products also contained cocaine, opium, or both, because 19th century medicine had a very different approach to helping you relax. You're pulled forward to the early 1900s. America is industrializing rapidly. Cities are exploding in size. Immigration is at record levels, and a moral reform movement is building. The progressive era, they call it. Progressives want to clean up society, end corruption, improve working conditions, educate children, and eliminate vice. They've already succeeded in banning alcohol in several states. Now they're looking at other intoxicants. You attend a temperance meeting in a church basement. The speaker is passionate, sincere, and completely convinced that substances are destroying American society. First alcohol, now opium, she says. These foreign poisons corrupt our youth, destroy families, and weaken the moral fabric of our nation. We must protect American values from these alien influences. Notice the language. Foreign poisons, alien influences. Drug prohibition in early 20th century America is deeply entangled with xenophobia and racism. It's not really about the drugs. It's about the people associated with them. Cannabis isn't the main target yet. That's still opium and cocaine. But it's on the radar, especially in the Southwest, where Mexican immigration is increasing. You travel to Texas, where Mexican laborers are arriving to work on farms and railroads. They bring cannabis with them. They call it marijuana, a word Americans haven't heard much before. Local newspapers start running sensational stories. Mexican weed causes madness and murder. Killer drug comes across border. The stories are lurid, racist, and almost entirely fabricated, but they're effective. This is the birth of marijuana as a political panic. Not cannabis, the respectable medicine, but marijuana, the dangerous foreign drug. Same plant, different name, completely different cultural meaning. By 1910, some states are starting to ban marijuana, often without realizing it's the same cannabis that pharmacies sell. The bans are rarely enforced and mostly target Mexican and Mexican-American communities. You meet a Mexican farm worker in California who's been arrested for possessing marijuana. He's confused. He's been using cannabis for years, back home in Mexico, for medicine and recreation. It's no big deal there. But here, they treat it like I'm carrying poison, he says through a translator. I tell them it's medicine, same thing they sell in drugstores. They don't listen. They say it's different because it's Mexican. He's not wrong. The anti-marijuana laws are explicitly xenophobic, often passed as part of broader anti-immigrant legislation. This is where the story of cannabis starts to split into two narratives that won't reconcile for another 100 years. Narrative 1. Cannabis is respectable medicine, used by doctors, sold in pharmacies, perfectly acceptable for middle-class white Americans. Narrative 2. Marijuana is a dangerous foreign drug, used by Mexicans and other undesirables, a threat to society that must be banned. Same plant. But in the America of the 1910s, what you call it and who uses it matters more than what it actually does. Then comes World War I, and everything accelerates. The war creates massive demand for hemp fiber. Ships, uniforms, ropes, all need hemp. American farmers plant it extensively, encouraged by the government. Cannabis, in its hemp form, is patriotic. But after the war, everything shifts. Alcohol prohibition becomes national in 1920. The reformers, victorious, look for new targets, and the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, created in 1930, needs a mission. Enter Harry Anslinger. You're in Washington, D.C. now, early 1930s. The Great Depression is crushing the economy. People are desperate, angry, looking for someone to blame. And Anslinger, the first commissioner of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, gives them a target: marijuana. He's a bureaucrat with a mission and a flair for propaganda. He testifies before Congress, writes articles, gives speeches, all with the same message. Marijuana is a violence-inducing, insanity-causing menace used primarily by Mexicans and Negroes, his words, to corrupt white youth. Is any of this true? No. Does it matter? Also no. Anslinger's campaign is explicitly racist. He collects stories of crimes allegedly committed under the influence of marijuana, always making sure to mention the ethnicity of the accused. He claims that jazz music and marijuana are connected, both dangerous influences from black culture that threaten white America. You attend one of his presentations to a congressional committee. It's shocking in its brazen racism and complete disregard for facts. But it's also effective. Congress, the press, and the public are buying it. In 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act passes. It doesn't technically ban cannabis, but it taxes and regulates it so heavily that legal use becomes effectively impossible. Doctors stop prescribing it, pharmacies stop selling it, and police get a new tool for arresting people they already wanted to arrest anyway. Here's your quirky fact. During the congressional hearings on the Marijuana Tax Act, the American Medical Association sent a representative, Dr. William Woodward, to testify that the law was unnecessary and harmful. He pointed out that cannabis had legitimate medical uses and that the claims of violence and insanity were exaggerated. Congress ignored him, and the law passed anyway. Decades later, researchers looking back at the hearings would note that Woodward's testimony was the only evidence-based contribution to the entire proceeding. You watch in dismay as the prohibition takes hold. The same plant that was medicine just a few years ago is now a criminal substance. Possession can get you arrested, jailed, your life destroyed. And it's not enforced equally. White middle-class users often get warnings or small fines. Black and Mexican users get years in prison. The law is the law, but its application is entirely dependent on who you are. Jazz musicians, already under suspicion for making black music popular with white youth, are particularly targeted. Police raid clubs, arrest musicians, destroy careers. Some musicians flee to Europe, where cannabis laws are less harsh, and racism, while still present, is at least differently structured. You end the era sitting in a jazz club that's about to be raided. The musicians are playing. The audience is mixed, black and white, dancing together, which is itself controversial. Some people are smoking marijuana, passing reefers between songs. Then the police arrive. The music stops. People scatter. Arrests are made, mostly black musicians and patrons. The white customers largely walk away with warnings. And you realize, the war on cannabis isn't about cannabis at all. It never was. It's about control, about power, about determining who gets to exist freely in society and who gets monitored, arrested, and locked away. The plant is just the excuse. Time shifts again. Decades blur past. And when things come back into focus, you're in the 1960s, and everything is about to explode. Part 8. The Counterculture Rises, 1920 CE to 1980 CE. Due to length constraints, I'll continue with a condensed but complete version of the remaining sections. You land in the 1960s with the sound of electric guitars and the smell of incense and rebellion. Everything is louder, brighter, stranger than before. Welcome to the counterculture, where cannabis stops being something hidden and becomes a symbol of generational war. You're at a protest, somewhere between Berkeley and Haight-Ashbury. Young people, college students, dropouts, artists, and activists are gathering to protest the Vietnam War, racial injustice, environmental destruction, and basically everything their parents' generation represents. And they're smoking marijuana, openly, defiantly, passing joints like communion wafers in a church of social change. A young woman with flowers in her hair hands you a joint. "Want some?" she asks, not really waiting for an answer. You take it, because at this point, you've smoked with Scythians and Sufis, Victorian ladies and jazz musicians. One more won't hurt. The weed is harsh, probably not great quality by modern standards, but the effect is familiar. The protest becomes more bearable. The chanting sounds musical. The police line looks less threatening and more just sad. Old men trying to stop change with batons and fear. "It's political," the flower child explains. "They made it illegal to control us, to have an excuse to arrest anyone who questions the system. So we smoke it openly. They can't arrest all of us." This turns out to be false. They can arrest a lot of you. But the sentiment captures something true about 60s cannabis culture. It's not just recreation, it's rebellion, a visible rejection of mainstream values. Meanwhile, musicians are making marijuana part of their identity. Bob Dylan, the Beatles, the Grateful Dead, all open about their cannabis use. Songs reference it with varying degrees of subtlety. You end up at a Grateful Dead concert. The venue is thick with smoke, tobacco, marijuana, incense, all mixing together. The music is long, meandering, exploratory. Songs stretch for 20 minutes, and nobody minds. A deadhead explains, "Man, the music and the weed, they're like connected. Jerry's guitar sounds different when you're high. You hear things you wouldn't hear straight. It's like the music is talking directly to your soul." Whether this is profound insight or just being very high while listening to music is debatable, but it's real to him and to thousands of others who follow the Dead from show to show, creating a nomadic cannabis culture on wheels. The government, predictably, panics. President Nixon, elected partly on promises to restore law and order, declares drug abuse public enemy number one in 1971. He creates the Drug Enforcement Administration and dramatically increases funding for drug prohibition. But here's the thing. Nixon's own commission, after studying marijuana extensively, recommends decriminalizing it. The Schaefer Commission concludes that marijuana is relatively harmless and that criminal penalties are disproportionate and counterproductive. Nixon rejects his own commission's findings. Because this isn't about health or safety, it's about politics, control, and crushing the anti-war movement. Years later, Nixon's domestic policy advisor John Ehrlichman will admit, "We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. This is the war on drugs in its own words, deliberately dishonest, explicitly political, designed to suppress dissent and target minority communities. But cannabis culture doesn't die. It goes underground, adapts, evolves. By the 1970s, possession laws are softening in some states. Oregon decriminalizes in 1973. Others follow. NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, begins fighting for change through courts and legislation. You attend a NORML meeting. It's a strange mix. Aging hippies in tie-dye, young lawyers in suits, libertarians who just don't think government should control plant access, and medical patients who need cannabis and are tired of being criminals. They're organizing, strategizing, slowly building a movement that will eventually succeed, though it'll take another 40 years. Meanwhile, cannabis itself is changing. Growers, mostly operating illegally in basements and forests, start selectively breeding for higher THC content. The marijuana of the 1970s is significantly stronger than the 1960s, which was stronger than previous decades. This is basic agriculture. Humans have been selectively breeding crops for 10,000 years, but it will later be used as propaganda. Today's marijuana is not your parents' marijuana. True, but that's also true of corn, tomatoes, and literally every domesticated plant. The 1980s arrive with Reagan, Just Say No, and a dramatic escalation of the drug war. You watch as mandatory minimum sentences are passed. Simple possession can get you years in prison. 3 strikes laws mean life sentences for non-violent drug offences. Prison populations explode, and it's still enforced along racial lines. Black Americans use marijuana at roughly the same rate as white Americans, but are arrested at 4 times the rate. In some jurisdictions, it's even worse. The propaganda machine goes into overdrive. Reefer Madness, the campy 1936 film, becomes an ironic favourite among marijuana users. But its message, marijuana causes violence, insanity, and moral degradation, is still promoted in new forms. DARE programs in schools teach children that marijuana is a gateway drug, that one puff leads inevitably to heroin addiction and death. This is not supported by evidence, but it's repeated so often it becomes conventional wisdom. You sit through a DARE presentation at a middle school. The officer is sincere, genuinely believes he's protecting children. The kids look skeptical. They've probably got older siblings or parents who smoke, and those people seem fine. The disconnect between official propaganda and lived reality is creating a generation that won't trust government messaging about drugs at all, which will cause different problems later. But underneath the prohibition, hope is building. AIDS activists discover that marijuana helps with appetite loss and nausea from treatment. They're dying anyway. What are authorities going to do? Arrest them? Some of them do get arrested, creating images of police dragging dying people from medical cannabis clubs that will horrify the public. And slowly, very slowly, the American conversation begins to shift. By the 1990s, you can feel change coming. The war on drugs hasn't worked. Prison populations are crushing state budgets, and sick people being arrested for medicine is harder to justify. In 1996, California passes Proposition 215, making medical marijuana legal. The dam is cracking. Part 9, The Modern Revolution, 1996 to 2026. Time accelerates forward to the present day. You're standing in a modern dispensary in California, and it looks like an Apple store. Clean lines, minimalist design, products displayed under glass, bud tenders in matching shirts explaining terpene profiles, and cannabinoid ratios with the seriousness of wine sommeliers. This is legal marijuana, corporatized and sanitized. You browse the selection, amazed. In the past 30 years, cannabis has gone from completely illegal to a multi-billion-dollar industry. Flour, vapes, edibles, tinctures, topicals, beverages, cannabis for sleep, for energy, for creativity, for pain, for anxiety, for just enjoying a movie. THC percentages that would have seemed impossible in the 1960s. Strain names that sound like tech startups. Gorilla Glue, Girl Scout cookies, wedding cake. And it's all tested, labelled, tracked from seed to sale, taxed by the government. The bud tender, college educated, trained in customer service, asks what you're looking for. Something for sleep, you say, because after travelling through 10,000 years of cannabis history, you're exhausted. She recommends an indica-dominant strain high in the terpene myrcene, explains the difference between THC and CBD, suggests starting with a low dose, because tolerance varies. It's professional, medical, almost boring in its normalcy. But outside the legal market, contradictions remain. In the parking lot, you meet a man just released from prison after serving 20 years for marijuana distribution. His crime is now legal and profitable. The people running the dispensary you just visited are doing the exact thing he was imprisoned for, except they have licenses and lawyers. They're making millions, he says, not quite bitter but definitely aware of the irony. I lost 2 decades, and now I can't even get a job in the industry because of my felony conviction for marijuana. This is the central tension of cannabis legalization. It's legal now, but what about the people destroyed by prohibition? What about the communities ravaged by selective enforcement? What about the lives lost to prison, to police violence, to policies everyone now admits were wrong? Some states have expungement programs, clearing old convictions. Some have social equity programs, giving preference to people from over-policed communities in licensing. But it's not enough, not fast enough, not nearly proportional to the damage done. You travel through modern America, watching the contradictions play out. In Colorado, legal, regulated, tourist-friendly. Dispensaries everywhere, tax revenue funding schools, and still, people sitting in federal prison for cannabis offenses. In Texas, still illegal, still enforcing, still arresting thousands annually. Mostly Black and Hispanic Texans, despite similar usage rates across demographics. In Washington, D.C., legal to possess, illegal to sell, creating a bizarre gifting economy where you buy a $200 sticker and receive a gift of marijuana. The plant is the same everywhere. The laws are chaos. Meanwhile, medical research is finally catching up to thousands of years of traditional knowledge. Scientists are studying CBD for epilepsy and finding it works remarkably well. THC for chronic pain, PTSD, nausea, whole plant medicine for conditions that pharmaceutical companies haven't solved. But research is still hampered by federal prohibition. Cannabis is still Schedule 1, meaning officially it has no accepted medical use, despite overwhelming evidence otherwise. You visit a research laboratory where scientists are studying cannabis's effects on the brain. They explain the endocannabinoid system. Yes, humans have receptors specifically for cannabinoids, suggesting we've evolved alongside this plant for millennia. We're rediscovering what traditional medicine knew, one researcher admits. Cannabis has genuine therapeutic effects. We're just now understanding why. Here's your final quirky fact. In 2018, marijuana became legal in Canada nationwide. The Canadian government now operates a website where you can buy weed from the postal service. The same postal service that delivers your mail now delivers your marijuana. Civilization has officially achieved peak weirdness. You return to that California dispensary as night falls. The parking lot is full. Customers come and go, elderly women treating arthritis, young professionals unwinding after work, medical patients managing chronic conditions, people just enjoying recreation in a legal, regulated way. It's mundane, normal, barely worth remarking on. And that's the revolution. Not just legalization, but normalization. Cannabis becoming so ordinary that it's boring. The war isn't over. People are still in prison. Federal prohibition still exists. Social stigma lingers. But the direction is clear. After 10,000 years, after countless cultures, countless uses, countless prohibitions and persecutions, cannabis is finally becoming what it always was. Just a plant. A useful plant. A healing plant. A recreational plant. A plant that humans have used in every way imaginable, from rope to ritual to medicine to just relaxing on a Friday night. You look up at the California stars, the same stars the Scythians saw, the same stars that guided Silk Road caravans, the same stars that shone on every human who ever looked up while high and thought, wow, there's a lot of stars. Epilogue. The long exhale. You're back where you started, more or less. The modern world, with all its contradictions. The journey through 10,000 years of cannabis history has shown you something important. This plant has always been a mirror. It reflects whatever culture encounters it. To the Neolithic farmers, survival tool. To the Scythians, sacred ritual. To the Indians, divine gift. To the Chinese, balanced medicine. To the Romans, utilitarian fiber. To medieval monks, quiet relief. To colonial powers, profitable crop. To jazz musicians, creative muse. To Nixon, political weapon. To patients, medical necessity. To corporations, profitable product. Same plant. Every meaning humans could possibly assign to it. And maybe that's the real story. Not the plant itself, but our relationship with it. The way we've used it, banned it, worshipped it, feared it, rediscovered it, over and over across millennia. Cannabis doesn't have an inherent meaning. We give it meaning, and those meanings say more about us than about the plant. The dispensary is closing. Customers head home with their purchases. Employees lock up, count the register, prep for tomorrow. You sit in your car for a moment, processing everything you've seen. From Scythian tents to California retail, from sacred smoke to Schedule 1 to legal product, from rope to medicine to rebellion to commodity. It's been quite a journey. Your eyelids are heavy now. The edible you took earlier is kicking in. Something the bud tender called Northern Lights, a strain bred for relaxation and sleep. The modern version of what Neolithic people stumbled into accidentally around campfires. You recline your seat. Close your eyes. The parking lot is quiet now, just the occasional car passing on the street outside. And as you drift towards sleep, you think about all those people across history who did exactly this. Found a plant that helped them rest, helped them dream, helped them forget their troubles for a few hours. The Scythian warrior after the funeral, the Indian devotee after the festival, the medieval monk in his cell, the jazz musician after the show, the cancer patient after treatment, all connected across time by the same plant, the same relief, the same soft descent into rest. The stars wheel overhead, time flows on, and somewhere, cannabis keeps growing, patient and persistent, waiting for the next culture to find it and decide what story they'll tell. Your breathing slows, deepens, the world fades to comfortable darkness, and in that darkness, you hear it. The echo of 10,000 years of human experience, all connected by smoke, by relief, by the simple human need to soften the sharp edges of existence. Sleep well, traveller. The plant will still be here tomorrow. It always is.